Hello, friends. Welcome back to another edition of the Lovecast with Jamal podcast. I am your host, Jamal Javanji. You are listening to episode 165. We're going to call this one my interview with Ayurvedic Doctor Victor Briere. Again, my interview with Ayurvedic Doctor Victor Briere. Guys, how are you? Happy belated 4th of July. I'm recording this just before or just after the 4th of July holiday. I'm really excited to be back on the show with you today. Have just a really important conversation. Obviously, if you've done any coaching work with me, or if you just know me personally, you know that I am passionate about holistic healing and really addressing a person's health from every angle, not just a physical angle, but also spiritual, emotional, and physical. They're all connected. And there is I don't know if you're familiar, if you've heard about Ayurvedic or Ayurveda. It is a very old paradigm of medicine, of healing, of health. And it is a framework that really finds its roots in the East. It comes out of India. It goes back, many thousands of years. But Ayurveda is, it's a thriving health system, predominantly in the East and India. But it's also there's many medical professionals here, even in the West and the United States, that are also trained physicians. Some of them are MDs. Some of them are just purely Ayurvedic doctors. But it is a growing Ayurveda is a growing health system here in the West as well. But it really has its roots in India and the East, and it is responsible for the healing of many chronic ailments and lots of people all over the world. And it goes back thousands of years, and but a lot of the understandings of Ayurvedic medicine are being understood now, even in the West and modern medical practice. So it is a fantastic. I am by no means an expert in Ayurvedic medicine, but it's something that I have a basis of understanding in, and it's something I'm growing in my awareness of. So I reached out to a physician, a doctor, an Ayurvedic doctor, who's been trained in the health modality of Ayurveda, and I asked him to be my guest on the show. And he really has a great understanding of, not just from a physical, kind of a tertiary understanding, but he really understands the depth of it. But he's able to break down the basics of Ayurveda and Ayurvedic understanding of health for us on the show today. And it doesn't matter who you are. This is not complex. It's very simple. But one of the reasons I wanted him to come on the show is to just kind of help us have a basis of understanding of what health is from a holistic perspective, from Ayurvedic perspective. And we talk about this in the show, but really the word Ayurveda means life, and Veda is the Sanskrit word for knowledge, right? So the knowledge of life is basically what Ayurveda means. And so I would invite you, if you care about health, if you care obviously about your own personal health, if you have had any kind of struggles with chronic illness or chronic disease, or even if not for yourself, even if you know people, maybe there's some loved ones, some people in your family that has struggled with sickness and illness, I would encourage you to listen to this episode, and maybe even have them tune into this episode. Really, it's just suspend your, what you think you know about health, and just be open. Have an open posture to listen, to understand, to hear things maybe from a slightly different perspective. Victor, really does a great job of breaking down the roots and the fundamentals of health and of really what Ayurveda is. And so I'm excited to share this episode with you, and would love to hear actually any insights you get from the episode. So a couple things I want to mention to you before we get into the episode is, number one, it really helps the podcast if you are a listener, if you would go to iTunes, or even if you listen on Spotify, do go on Spotify and just give us a rating or a review. Predominantly, if you have to do one, go to iTunes. So you can, whether it's on your phone or through Apple iTunes on your computer, just find the Lovecast with Jamal podcast on iTunes. Give us a rating and a review. It just takes a few minutes, nothing, and it's totally free, but it really helps the podcast get exposure. So please do that. And the second thing I want to tell you about is we are going to be in a few weeks launching my introductory. It's basically an introductory program to my coaching. It's called the Sustainable Alignment Workshop, and it's just the fundamentals of learning how to take control of your life and get into alignment with life. And we've had a fantastic group of people just finish it's a 6-week group workshop. And if you're remotely interested in this, we're going to be having another workshop kickoff in a few weeks. Would love to have you part of that if that's something that you feel inclined to do. So let me invite you to go to my website, which is jamaljavanji.com. And then you'll see right there, first thing that pops up is information about the Sustainable Alignment Workshop. You can watch a video there with some folks who've went through it. And then you can also, fill out the form, and somebody will get back with you to give you more information about the workshop. Okay. So those are the two things I wanted to mention. Let me just jump in. I want to present this interview with Victor Briere, the Ayurvedic doctor, to you, and I really hope it adds a lot of value to your understanding. So without further ado, here is my interview. Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of the Lovecast. You're in for a treat today. I'm actually sitting across the proverbial podcasting table from Dr. Victor Briere. And Dr. Briere is an Ayurvedic doctor. He's a teacher, he's a speaker, he's the founder of the International Institute of Ayurveda. And I am super excited to get into this conversation with Dr. Briere today because Ayurveda is, I am by no means an expert in Ayurveda, but what I do know has fascinated me. And I really think this is a long overdue conversation to have on the podcast here. So Dr. Briere, welcome to the Lovecast podcast.
Thanks, Jamal. I appreciate you having me. And Victor's good.
Victor, okay.
Yeah, Victor's good. We could drop the doctor thing because Ayurvedic doctor and doctor are two different worlds. So I want to make sure that, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd love to ask you, okay, so I know we were chatting a little bit before we jumped on the podcast here. We were talking a little bit about your background. And so you're originally from Southern California, right?
Yeah, I'm from West Los Angeles. So I grew up in the middle of a gigantic city.
Totally. Is that out towards like Pasadena or that kind of direction?
Closer to Santa Monica.
Okay. Yeah. Totally. So you're born and raised West Los Angeles. How does somebody from West Los Angeles get into Ayurvedic medicine?
Well, that's a great question. So I got into Ayurvedic medicine after college. I basically started out, I grew up obviously in LA and did kind of all the normal West LA type stuff. I went to a prep school and all that. And I had a very normal, I would say, average mentality around health, which is, hopefully you're all good. And if you get sick, you go to a doctor and hopefully they can help. And if they can't, they send you to another doctor and hopefully that person can help. And if they can't, then they send you to another doctor and eventually, hopefully someone can help. And if no one can help, then sorry. So I kind of grew up with that mentality and didn't think much of it. I was a relatively healthy young guy until I turned around 18, went off to college, and I started having a back issue that was like, it wasn't that bad, but it also was very irritating, nagging, chronic, Mm-hmm. And so I did exactly what I knew how to do. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. And basically because my situation wasn't that bad, and it didn't fall into a specific category of problem, it was just kind of basically like I got just passed off from person to person because, it wasn't that big of a deal, right? It was like, well, it's not life-threatening and, you're not. So just go see someone else if they can't help. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Until one time, a doctor at UCLA, he looked at my file and he was like, all right, listen, I'm not going to send you to someone else. You've been to 8 people and we've done the tests that we're going to do. And, basically all someone's going to offer you is either painkillers or surgery.
Unbelievable. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Was this like a lower back issue?
It was actually an upper or middle thoracic back issue behind my shoulder blade. Yeah. So, I got the message, right? He was basically saying like, sorry, man.
Nothing we can do unless you want painkillers or surgery.
Right. Yeah. Painkillers or surgery is what we're going to offer you. And good luck, And I appreciated the honesty of that. So because that honesty helped me look for something else. It was like, okay, I'm not gonna be 19 years old. At the time I was 19. I got that message. And I'm not gonna be 19 years old. I'm not gonna do some exploratory surgery that basically this doctor was saying isn't gonna do anything, right? And I'm certainly not gonna just start taking painkillers. That's not really what I want to do. So I signed up for my very first yoga class. And I realized for the first time in my life how really I was really tense. And I had never really known because I wasn't some great athlete, but I was a decent athlete. So I played sports. I was very active. I didn't have any issues, quote unquote, with that stuff. But the moment I stepped onto a yoga mat, I realized really, it's like, whoa, I'm really tense in my body,
Oh.
Yeah. And so I decided to roll the dice. Yeah.
That's such an interesting point you're making. By the way, I mean, I have had, my mother, she passed away, late last year, but she had chronic back issues that, did the same thing you did, doctor to doctor to doctor. And they did exactly that, painkillers and surgery. And she never recovered. It really sent her downhill. I think it was her back surgery that she ultimately never really recovered from in her trajectory. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I know so many people that this is a broken record specifically. And one of the things that I really wish people would have addressed with her was tension, which is what you're bringing up, because she was so tense as an individual, which interesting, like what causes tension in the body, right? Well, there's a number of things, but we never got to that with my mother or with so many other people. Why are you so tense? So I love where this is going. So thank you. I just wanted to interject that.
Oh yeah, of course. The story that I'm telling was such a common story, and for me, it was my left shoulder blade, but for someone else, it's their stomach or it's their whatever, the million things the million ailments we suffer from as human beings.
Sure.
So yeah, I rolled the dice with this yoga instructor and I just said, hey, would you please see me one-on-one? Maybe you can help me. And she was like, yeah, sure. Of course. So we set up a time one-on-one the following week. And she took a good look at me. We spent about half an hour. She said, okay, move this way, do this, do that, and she assessed me. And very similar to like my experiences with physical therapists, it was like that. So, but she was looking at it from a little bit of a different angle. She was looking at it very holistically. And so, by the end, she was like, okay, do these 3 postures and let me know. So I was like, okay. So I went home, did the 3 postures every day. And in about 2 weeks, I was completely pain-free.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it was that simple. And I was like, well, so, obviously I was happy to be pain-free, but I was like, whoa, wait a second here. How come no one's talking about this? I know people are talking about this, but so being an 18-year-old guy or growing up until the age of 18, I would have laughed at someone who went to a yoga class, because that was now, of course, now it's 18 years later and it's become much more popular. But anyways, it wasn't being talked about like the experience I'd had. No one had sat me down and said, hey, you need to try some of these other healing arts because you can avoid all this and they have some answers. It wasn't talked about like that. It was like, it was like a joke almost. Yeah.
Totally. And that's something I've observed as well, is that when it comes to serious medical conversation, people always elevate, your traditional Western pharmaceutical surgical approach to health issues as being serious and science backed. But then when you start talking about yoga or, any kind of what's quote unquote billed as alternative health, it's almost like, yeah, that's for people who want to dabble, and it's not for serious folks who have real issues. It's not a real form of treatment. And what I'm hearing you say is no, absolutely. It's the most serious thing you did to get a hold of chronic back issues, because that could have sent you down a very different trajectory for your life had you followed the prescribed route of painkillers or surgery. Could have been a whole different story. So amazing what you're sharing here. You know, and we can get into this a little bit more, but obviously, when you have a chronic situation and you've tried just about everything, you become more serious. You become more open, I should say. So obviously, that opening led you to this yoga teacher, who then prescribed the three postures that you did consistently for a couple of weeks, which solved the problem pretty effortlessly. So then you're seeing the need. Okay, we're not really having this conversation in a serious way. So where did that lead you? Just with that realization.
Yeah, so it was my moment of like, okay, there's a bigger world out there than I've been told about. And I was at a good place in my life to have that experience, because I was going to finish college, and I had to make decisions on how I wanted to live my life after that. So my first choice was to go traveling for a year, because I wanted to experience some of this world that maybe I had never experienced before. And I was fortunate enough, I did the whole traditional classic, I sold the truck I had, and I rummaged through my garage, my garage of my childhood, to find everything I could sell, and saved up some money. And, I was like, all right, I have 15 grand. I'm going for a year, like, I'll see you guys later. So I did that, which was wonderful. And I made it over to Thailand, Japan. And funnily enough, I didn't go to India on that trip for a variety of reasons, but I started exposing myself to the more Eastern style of life in whatever way I could. And so I started just opening up my mind more and more to all that, reading a lot of things, practicing more yoga, and came back to Los Angeles. And because I had I ran out of money. So I came back to LA, got a job. And it was in LA, I met my current yoga teacher, a different yoga teacher, and sat down and started talking about some of my experiences. And we started talking about the spirituality of yoga, not like yoga class, right? And he said, have you ever heard of Ayurveda? And amazingly, I had not yet. And so I was like, what's that? And he described it to me, and off to the races I went, and I never looked back after that. I decided I was going to change my profession, do everything, and devote myself to that healing system, because I believed it has great wisdom for how to actually be healthy, as opposed to just avoid and manage crisis.
Totally. 100%. Wow. Amazing. And what did you study? What were you studying in college?
In college, I studied Western philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So, so complete other direction when you got into Ayurveda. So can you, for the listeners, kind of give us a nutshell, like, if someone's like, well, what is Ayurveda? How do you define it? What is it?
Ayurveda means, literal translation is the science of life. Veda means science. Ayus or Ayur means life. And so it's the science of longevity, how to live a long and healthy life. And it's been around for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and more than that. But it's been written down about 5,000 years ago. So it was a bunch of physicians getting together, sharing their vast experiences of how to heal people, and putting it together into a system that is, it's not, it's supposed to be based on the fundamental principles of nature.
Totally. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. So you are a doctor of Ayurveda, right? Is that correct? And so how does one become a doctor of Ayurveda?
Well, at the time I started studying in the West, there was no Ayurvedic doctor status. Ayurveda in the United States is to this day completely unlicensed and unregulated. So it's not like there's a preset government dictated path of, how to become an Ayurvedic doctor, a practitioner, or whatnot. So, there are some groups of people, the big ones, NAMA, that, say, hey, we're going to say if you do this level of education, then you get this title. And so, you do all that stuff and you get certified and you go to your courses and things like that. And I studied for a few years. And then about 5 years later, all of a sudden it was like, well, now we say you can call yourself an Ayurvedic doctor if you meet these requirements. So I filled out the application and got the title and all that stuff. But so that's how you do it in the United States. But in India, it's where Ayurveda is from, or what we now call India would be more accurate. It is a whole, you got to go to med school, basically. Yeah.
Totally.
4 to 6 years of med school. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the difference between an Ayurvedic doctor who studied in India and the Ayurvedic doctor who studied in the United States is pretty large.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, okay, so as you're getting into your training, right, and you're learning, at what point was this like a gradual implementation of helping people with what you were learning, or was there at some point where you said, okay, I'm now going to start treating folks?
There was a point where when I had that conversation with my yoga teacher, and I decided that's like, okay, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to become an Ayurvedic professional, whatever you want to call it. Right. At that point, I decided I'm going to get trained up and I'm going to run an Ayurvedic clinic. I'm going to go for it. So after 2 years, I was able to open up my clinic and go for it. So I started seeing people at that point.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about, from my understanding, Ayurveda is really based upon a philosophy of understanding your type, of like everybody has a certain type, right? So we call those doshas, right? So there's everybody's a predominant dosha. It's like there's a certain body type. Can you explain the concept of doshas a little bit further?
Yeah, it's okay. So little background on that. I won't answer your question so straightforward. Take the practice of yoga. Yoga, the word yoga literally means to yoke oneself to something, right? And in the practice of yoga as a spiritual practice, that means to your true nature or the divine nature. So that's a big deal. That's not like some small statement, right?
Huge.
And that is a practice that people devote their entire life to. Like if you've ever seen a sadhu in India, right? They don't live a normal life. And so when yoga practices came to the United States, you get a huge variety of expressions and all that stuff. And nowadays, a lot of it's lost its essence, right?
Totally.
People go to a yoga class and do postures, and that's fine.
Sure.
That's cool, right?
Sure.
But that's not really yoga. Like when I was living in Los Angeles, I went down Venice Beach, and there's literally I don't know if it's still there, but there was a yoga school, and literally on gigantic letters painted on the side of the building, it says, no granola, no chanting, no something, right? And I was like, how can you teach a yoga class without chanting? Like mantra and chanting are one of the core practices of the entire whole point of the whole thing. So, okay, that mentality, right? And it comes to the West, and it's just like, we're only going to take the parts of it we like and leave the parts of it we don't understand out. Not fair, right? Okay. So same thing's happening to Ayurveda. So we have this nice word dosha, and we have this nice word, type, and you can go online and you could take a quiz. And then at the end, you get marked as either a pitta, kapha, or vata. And those are the words. And then, it says like, you take the quiz and you score a score and you're a pitta type, and it has a little picture of a fire. And it says, you'll tend to be angry and you should focus on cooling foods.
Right.
Okay. Not that there's no truth to that, but what a watering down of a 5,000-year-old medical system.
It's an oversimplification.
Totally. Way. It's turning it into a cute game. Basically. Right.
Yeah.
And I personally am not a fan of that. So, but to answer your question for real, yes, there are doshas, and Ayurveda has a lot of writings about, hey, if you have one person who has a core constitution, right? Their basic framework of how their body's supposed to be, and everyone has that, then you can't treat someone with a constitution type of A the same way you treat someone with a constitution type of B. They might have the same symptoms, but because they have a completely different physical game going on, right? You got to treat them completely differently, even though they might both be complaining of a headache.
So good. That's such a powerful point you're making. And I really appreciate you bringing up the, just kind of the as you're mentioning, the Western tendency, like with yoga, right? We've taken this deep understanding of inner union and we've made it into a set of physical stretches and boiled it down to that, which makes sense because the West is predominantly don't have the ability to focus on the dimension of life that is unseen, right? Which is an inner dimension, right? That we don't emphasize that in the West. We just focus on the physical seen, which is part of the problem. But it's interesting that we take yoga and we say, okay, we're going to take out this entire inner dimension understanding of it. We're going to really boil down one aspect of asanas or postures. I'm going to emphasize on that, which really guts it of its essence. But it's the same. I love that you mentioned that with Ayurveda too, because that is a tendency for sure. But what you're saying about people's constitutions, right? So not everybody has the same fundamental constitution,
Right.
So we talked about vata, pitta, or kapha, right? So these are words that represent different constitutions. Like that, just that understanding in itself opens up a whole other world, because in modern Western, medical practice, people are treated as they're all the same. You prescribe the same thing for the same ailment to, no matter who you're dealing with. And I love the fact that this is such a personalized, this really comes down to understanding what is your constitution. So that will inform how you address certain imbalances in the body. So good.
Yeah, definitely. And the idea is that while people certainly have commonalities between each other, everyone technically, if you get down to it, has a completely unique distribution of those vata, pitta, kapha elements. And for those who have never heard those words, without getting too crazy far into it, they're the fundamental forces of nature at play. And the study of Ayurveda is how fundamental forces of nature play out inside a biological form and what it means. So, like, for example, the word vata is a description of a physiological process or a number of physiological processes that deal with the fundamental principle of movement in nature, which is governed by the change in pressure of one system to another. So the reason our blood flows through our body is all based on pressure changes created by the heart and the vessels and all that stuff, right? And so when we use the word vata, it's saying that, the vata dosha rules the circulatory system because it's your physiology's ability to change the way pressure operates inside your body in an intelligent way so that you can maintain homeostasis with what's called your prakriti or your core constitution. And that's a very sophisticated thing, right? So that's vata. Vata is not wind, not fair. Yeah.
Totally. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So vata would be equated with pressure, flow, movement, right?
Yes.
What about pitta?
Pitta deals with a fundamental force of nature that you can take any amount of energy and focus, and there's no perceivable limit to how much energy can be focused in a single point. So that's a law of physics, right? So you can take any given place, and if you read the temperature, it can get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher to insanely incomprehensible numbers, right? The fact that that's our reality, the reality that we live in, means that energy can be focused into a point.
Okay.
So taking that same rule and applying it to a biological system, you have the ability for your body to focus heat in certain regions in order to break down certain things to then allow for certain processes to occur. So in simpler terms, it's digestion.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
pitta.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the idea of fire that breaks down that. And
So fire. Yeah. So fire's a metaphor. Fire's a metaphor for pitta. We don't actually have fire in our body.
Sure, but it's a metaphor of the metabolic process. Then would that be fair to say?
Exactly. Okay. Yes.
Okay, and then we have kapha, right? How would you? Kapha. How? What's the best way to understand kapha?
Kapha is the fact that certain things can combine and have a density, which provides a resistance to pressure. So vata is a polarity to kapha. Kapha and vata are polarities. So kapha allows your body to create structures that resist and contain pressure so that certain physiological functions can play out. So they create channels. So vata would be an expression of how blood flows, not the blood itself, but how the blood flows through an artery. The artery represents the structure that kapha creates. It contains the pressure and directs the pressure to go a certain direction. So it's the container.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Super helpful. Can you talk a little bit about chronic illness? What in from an Ayurvedic standpoint, what is the root issue? What is the root cause of chronic illness?
Oh, how big of a conversation do you want on that? I'll tell you the root. The root. All right, the root. Okay, here's the quote from the Ayurvedic text. The root cause of all disease is the perception of being separate from spirit.
Wow. Okay. Let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So the root cause at the fundamental essence level,
yes,
is perceptions of separation, right?
Perception of separation from spirit.
Spirit, which is our core essence, right? Is spirit.
Correct.
So health, life, ultimately. Now, I think maybe another Sanskrit word that people use a lot, but it's prana, but it's energy, right? Energy.
Not essence. Prana. That's a whole different deal.
Okay. So prana would be more life force energy, right? In the body, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but what you're speaking of as spirit is you're talking about source, even beyond the life force energy. We're talking about what even somebody would consider divine, right? God, source, creation, energy.
The primal thing, the primal source of all.
Okay.
So that's what Ayurveda says is the root cause of all disease, is that we walk around thinking that we're separate from that. We buy into duality. Okay. And then that starts a chain reaction that ultimately, if you go down 25 million levels, right, results in the rash I have on my arm.
Okay. So thank you for sharing. That's super helpful. So could you walk us through a little bit? How does this begin to play out in, is there something when it comes to chronic illness, how does it break down at the level of dosha?
Yeah. Okay. So if we don't go all the way back to that core, right? Because what does that even mean? That's you could spend a lifetime on that one thing. So if we go to let's stick with biology, right? All right. Mm-hmm. So when the doshas go out of balance, meaning your physiology, so the vata, pitta, and kapha, which are intelligent, right? You could say they have agendas. They have specific functions. They're not arbitrarily doing stuff. They're actually acting in order to maintain homeostasis. So they're always adjusting based on your environment and your life. And
homeostasis is the condition of balance, of union, right?
And homeostasis is unique for you. My homeostasis is not the same as your homeostasis. Totally. That's the idea of a unique constitution.
Sure.
Yeah. So when the doshas can no longer maintain that homeostasis, now time comes into play, right? So you're spending time out of balance.
Okay.
That creates, so let's say that I eat too much, right? Now, my pitta and vata doshas are unable to manage that well. They can't keep up with the amount I ate. My body's not built to digest all that in an appropriate amount of time, right? So that puts stress on the tissue elements of my body. Maybe it's my stomach, maybe it's my intestines, maybe it's my bladder, whatever. Somewhere is going to get that stress. Mm-hmm. And now that stress over time will start to alter the function of that tissue. Mm. And once that tissue malfunctions or gets deformed, we have what we would call a disease.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fascinating. Great explanation. Can you give maybe some examples of a common vata chronic illness that comes from an imbalance in the vata dosha?
Sure. Okay. So let's say that I undereat. Okay. So I have some emotional patterns around food, and that's going to become the real cause of disease, right? What goes on in your mind. But for now, let's leave that alone. So let's say I have some problems with food, and I eat like one meal a day. Let's say I'm overweight and I'm insecure about it, right? So I want to lose weight. And the way I decide to lose weight is by not eating enough. So I'm not feeding my body nourishment. I'm not giving it nourishment. Your body is literally made out of food, water, air, and Ayurveda also says sense perceptions, but leave that alone right now. Food, water, and air. That's what your body's made out of, right? So I'm talking about the physical flesh. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if I don't eat, I don't have the raw material to build the tissues, right? Okay. So let's say that goes on for 8 months, 10 months, a year. So I've spent a lot of time not providing my kapha in my body with enough material to build new tissue. So my tissues start to deplete. And now that doesn't happen in one place, that happens all over the body. But let's say the way my body compensates is that it starts stripping the bone tissue first. It stops building bone and starts stripping bone tissue first. And after a year, I have less bone tissue, and so I have the pressure systems in my body have changed because ever subtly now, right? Because there's actually literally less tissue density, so there's actually more space for pressure to play out differently in. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that happens over a year, and then let's say I kind of normalize my diet and I move on. And then another year later, the same thing happens. I get triggered again. I go through the same process, and I spend another year undernourishing myself, more damage to the bone tissue. Mm-hmm. And then I recover. And maybe another 3 years goes on. You get the pattern, right? Mm-hmm. On and off for years. Okay, now 15 years have passed. And now, actually, I'm overeating, right? I'm doing the opposite. Mm-hmm. And because I'm overeating, my body can't digest food well. And instead of converting all the things I eat into useful tissue material, mm-hmm. I can only convert some of it into useful material, and I can't get rid of the rest of it. So some stuff that's neither tissue material nor waste that's going to get rid of sticks around in my body. Mm-hmm. And now that stuff circulates. And when it gets to the bone tissue, in all the little places and crevices where that my bone tissue got damaged over the years, that stuff that gets lodged into those places. Mm. And it kind of starts to mess with how my bone tissue functions and how all the cells move and spread and all that stuff. And what makes matters worse is actually my immune system starts picking it up as a threat. Wow. Right. And so now it attacks and I get inflammation. Mm-hmm. Let's say that happens in my joints, and we call that arthritis.
Interesting.
Right.
Very interesting. Okay.
So that's just one way. There are a million ways it could happen, right?
Totally. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Totally helpful. And then, of course, if we were to move into kapha, right? So an imbalance of the kapha. Do you have any quick examples of kapha imbalances or chronic ailments that come from an imbalance there?
Sure. Take diabetes, one of the number one illnesses in the States. So that one's a little bit more complicated as the pathology, but you'll get the idea. According to Ayurveda, diabetes starts in the stomach. We have a very thick lining in our stomach that's very mucousy, which is a kapha type substance our body creates. And it sloughs off. We digest part of it every time we go through the digestive process. So in diabetes, that lining becomes very thick and a lot of it sloughs off and it's very sticky and gooey. And so that moves down the digestive tract, and then some of it gets absorbed back into the bloodstream. And then it goes and circulates through the kidneys and it clogs the kidneys. Mm. Right. And now you have impaired kidneys. And because this whole time you've been sedentary and you've probably been eating too many sweet foods, heavy foods, not just sweet, heavy, high fat foods, meat, a lot of those kinds of things, hard to digest stuff. Right. It gums up the system more or less. So that's excess kapha sitting in the system that can't be digested, and it's encroaching on all the channels that things need to flow through. And the body just gets overwhelmed, and now the pancreas can't produce enough insulin, and on and on and on and on and on. And then you get high blood sugar chronically, right? Chronically.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I bet it's been fascinating for you, right? With your own clinic, treating people, treating chronic illness. What are some things you've seen? What are some examples of breakthroughs in chronic conditions that you've seen as a doctor of Ayurvedic health?
Oh man, if someone's willing to change their lifestyle, they can have huge benefit on chronic conditions. Change up your diet, change the times you wake up, go to sleep, take on some appropriate practices, start working on the mental components of any disease. And it's amazing how fast people can turn around, the big challenge people face is the unwillingness to make changes in their own life, which I'm sure you see all the time as a life coach, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I always say that, unless a person can see kind of on the balance sheet of life that what they're experiencing is costing them more than that's paying them, they're not yet willing to make a change. But when they can perceive that, hey, the way I've been living or what I'm experiencing is actually costing me more, whether it's just life or enjoyment or stress or money or whatever it is, then when that balance sheet, when they say, oh, this is costing me more than I'm getting, that's when change, the perception of that's when people are willing to say, they get desperate, I'll do whatever I need to do. So what would you say, what's the biggest breakthrough you've seen? What most people would consider an impossible case. What's something that you've seen in your work that's just really, kind of defies the commonly understood limitations of what's possible?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was one young man who was diagnosed with Crohn's at 9 years old. So, big time problem. And I met him when he was 27. And, so in and out of hospitals his whole life. When I met him, he's 5'7", weighed 78 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
So severe. I mean, really on the borderline of life and death. A lot.
Totally. And Crohn's disease is considered to be incurable.
And so, basically he'd tried a bunch of things, but what he'd been working on was always, you go to the hospital and they, either inject him with nutrition or force feed him basically. Right. And just stuff him full of calories. But actually, Ayurvedically speaking, that is not a good approach because the Agni, the digestive power, cannot handle that, cannot digest that properly. And so you're going to continue the cycle of inflammation in the gut because the body can't tolerate that. So one of the first things I told him, I said, okay, we're going to feed you only what you can digest. We're going to start with gruel, basically, which is rice and water for the most part. Right. And, so that was scary for him and his family, because it's like, wait, that's not enough calories and, the whole thing and on and on. It's like, yeah. Okay. So we got over that and put him on some specialized herbs and started. So this guy at first, because a disease that severe rarely comes without a mental component.
Oh, totally.
So we started exploring that, right? Big time. So I talked to him 3 times a day for the first 3 months because he needed the stability. He needed someone to talk to, right? He needed to feel supported. He needed all that, right? And he needed, when he was scared, because he was so scared, as I would be too if I were in his position, right? he needed someone that he could talk to, and he didn't have anyone like that in his life, right? So we talked 3 times a day at first. That goes on for months, but slowly and surely he starts putting on weight. And very slowly, and there are setbacks, right? Like he goes down and up and down and up, and it's the whole thing, and it goes on, and every time there's a change, he's very nervous. But long story short, a year goes by, and we've shifted his protocol many times, but a year goes by, and he's 117 pounds, and he's moving around really great, and he's continuing all his stuff, and he's back in college, and he's overall a way more resilient person, right? He's not done with his healing process, but he's way, way, way far along. And yeah, that's a good story.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, I still talk to him every day. Not 3 times a day, but once a day. We check in for just a few minutes.
Beautiful.
But we still do that, and we go on and on and on. And he's about ready to take the next step, where we're going to try and get him to about 135 pounds next.
Beautiful. That's fantastic. Love it. Love
it.
Could you talk a little bit about the vagus nerve and the significance of the vagus nerve?
Oh yeah. The vagus nerve is, for those who don't know, it's part of the autonomic nervous system, and it's getting a lot of popularity these days. It's basically, in a nutshell, responsible for either up-regulating our nervous system or down-regulating our nervous system. The vagus nerve itself down-regulates the nervous system, meaning it makes you feel calm and reduces all your biological functions to be in a state of calm. So rest, digest are the 2 hot words. And then it releases when you need to get stressed out and be very active, right? So your heart rate goes up, your breath rate goes up, and you start getting defensive, basically. So for the most part. And it plays an extremely crucial role in healing, because unless you can spend most of your time in the parasympathetic nervous system, which the vagus nerve brings you to when it's healthy, you're not going to heal. You won't do it.
Because if you're not in the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning you're in the sympathetic nervous system, kind of the fight or flight mechanism, the conditions in the body are not such that you can achieve a state of homeostasis in the body. Is that correct?
Exactly. You can't digest your food properly. And if you can't digest your food properly, you're done for. It's just a matter of time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the vagus nerve, addressing the vagus nerve is key, right?
Always. And a lot of Ayurvedic principles encourage a strong parasympathetic life. So, for example, someone comes in and says, I'm stressed. What do I do? And I say, well, let's do some breathing exercise. And it's like, I've tried that. It's like, no, you haven't. Because if you've really done it, you wouldn't be like this, right? So it's like, how long did you try it for? 2 days, it didn't work. It's like, okay, that's not going to do it, right?
Sure.
Because the vagus nerve is, I don't want to say the vagus nerve, the autonomic nervous system is how our mind-body interfaces, right? So you have to address the patterns of the mind and admit that they have this extremely profound effect on our physiology all day long, 24/7, to the point where much more profound than the food we eat. Because it even chooses the food we eat, those patterns. So when you start working with the autonomic nervous system, when you start giving people Ayurvedic lifestyle practices, it's not like the people studying Ayurveda in the past didn't know this, right? Like I just saw an article the other day on CNN. It says, studies now show that anxiety and depression are linked to autoimmune disease. And it's like, okay, fine. I'm glad that study came out, right?
Right.
But come on, guys.
Yeah.
This is not new information.
This is not new.
Yeah.
It's like breaking news we just learned. It's like thousands of years.
Yeah. It's like,
this has been understood.
Yeah. So it's like, yes, we need to work on your vagal tone, would be the modern way of saying it. But the number one way, hands down, of doing that is pranayama, or whatever equivalent breathing practice that your tradition espouses, right? And there's a reason for that. the diaphragm connects to the vagus nerve, and it's one of the things that we both control unconsciously and consciously simultaneously. So it links up the autonomic nervous system with the mind. So it's perfect. So there is no better substitute, right? You can also dump your face in ice water, but that's less pleasant.
Totally. Well, in my coaching work, first thing we learn to do is how to breathe. And we work on breathing exercises for this very reason, because we want to shift out of the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, which is causing all the chronic conditions, and move into the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's a game changer. And the work I do, even not even getting into really the meat of physical health, I know I couldn't do it. We could not make the progress in helping people really come into a state of wholeness and ease suffering, get a hold of their mind and their mental processes. We couldn't even help people do that without beginning with breathing, conscious, focused breathing that addresses the vagus nerve. So I love what you're saying there. So powerful. And again, people who say, yeah, I've tried that, it didn't work. It's like, no, you haven't tried it. Yeah. You totally haven't tried it. And it's not like, someone saying, yeah, I brushed my teeth, it didn't work. I did it once. Right. It didn't work. I didn't see it. It's like, I worked out once. Yeah, it didn't work. It's like, yeah, no, I think that's a byproduct. Correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like when somebody says something like that, like I tried it and it didn't work, usually that's because they're approaching a course of action from a standpoint of maybe an allopathic medical model, where they're saying, I took a prescription, typically you go to the doctor, they prescribe you with a prescription, you take a pill, you see a result, and people, when they approach life or health that way, they're disappointed, because it's like, that's not how life actually works. Like, it's a process. Living is a process. It's not a pill you take. It's a way of approaching how you are as a life entity. So, health is very much that way. But I think a lot of people really they stumble because they want a pill or an injection or some quick fix that ultimately, the reason that condition is there in the first place is because we haven't learned how to live well. So it's really about learning how to live, how to be in union internally. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm happy you said that, because that is what happens all too much is, and it's hard because we grew up in a Western mindset. And so I catch myself still thinking allopathically. Right.
Sure.
And so, so it's like, well, am I saying that if you correct your breathing, that every disease you have is going to heal? Absolutely not. It doesn't work like that. But do you need to do that? And yes. Right. And when you combine all the lifestyle things,
sure,
and you got a really good shot at, if not completely reversing, going a long way to reverse your chronic health condition.
Totally. And that's good news. That's really good news. And a lot of people say it's got to be more complex than just breathing. I'll say, well, it is. It is. Of course, there's more to it, but it's not less than breathing.
Yeah. And so, if someone's willing to take on some practices, change not just what they eat, but the times they eat, and in what mental state they're in while they're eating, and change some worldviews, around the autonomic nervous system, vagus nerve, all that stuff. They have a lot to do with how we view the world. When the vagus nerve clicks off and then we get threatened, now all of a sudden the person who is my best friend is my worst enemy. Mm-hmm. That all happens inside me. And I am 100% convinced that it's the truth until I snap out of it.
Sure.
And so we got to work on tempering our worldviews, because I hate to say it, everybody, and I fall into this category too, we do not see reality as it is. We make up our world in a lot of ways, and most of the time we're missing important information.
100%. Well said, and that's 100%. Yeah, totally. Well, let's wrap up with this. I would love for you to, and thank you again for the work you're doing and for just what you're sharing here today. What would you say to somebody listening to this podcast, and they're thinking, man, that's a lot of information, or that's I don't even know where to start. What would you advise, or how would you instruct somebody that just wants to take a little more control over their health than maybe what they've had? Where should somebody start? What's one thing anybody could do?
I would definitely say get assistance, get support, and don't look for something that's going to be a quick fix. Try and find someone who will actually sit down and talk to you, human to human, and be like, all right, what's your day look like? And, why do you do that? And really, and not just like, okay, so what are you here for? Oh, you got a headache? Well, you need more protein. Okay, go eat more protein. See you next time. Like, if that's the attitude, just don't go back and see that person. Find someone you can actually talk to and actually who's going to address you as an individual and, put forth a little effort into helping you figure yourself out while you do it.
Beautiful. So good. So good. Thank you, Victor. I appreciate your time. And where can people get in touch with you or learn more about your work?
I'm easy to get a hold of. You can reach me at iiayurveda.com. That's short for International Institute of Ayurveda.com.
Okay. So and then ayurveda.com.
Yeah. iiayurveda.com. You can email me and I'll get back to you.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jamal.
Appreciate your experience. All right. Take care. And thank you guys for listening. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.